Hi, Barnaby. Thanks so much for being with us. I mean, first, if you can, address the mystery of this bacteria. When did it suddenly appear and why? And why was it only elephants that were apparently affected?
Well, conservationists started talking about what was happening in northern Botswana back in May, but it's taken some time for us to reach this verdict, this conclusion today. The Botswana government took samples from the dead elephants. It was apparent very quickly that these elephants hadn't been poached, their tusks had not been removed. They eliminated other possible causes. It wasn't anthrax poisoning. It wasn't some mystery virus. And step by step, with the help of laboratories in Canada, in the United States, in Zimbabwe and South Africa, this is the conclusion that they've come to. But you're right. It really does raise the question, why only elephants? If there is something toxic in the algae in water holes around which animals gather during the rainy season, there were many other animals drinking. And the Botswanan authorities, in fairness, have been quite open about this. That is a mystery. There are various hypotheses. For example, elephants, as you can see in those wonderful pictures there, they spent an awful lot of more time than many species wallowing around in water. Perhaps with their trunks and their tusks, they get more into the silt at the bottom of the waterhole, and that might explain why they were particularly and tragically vulnerable. But the Botswanan authorities aren't pretending to have the answer to that yet.
Right. I think that what's so upsetting about this, though, is that it's as if the threats posed to elephants by humans weren't enough. Now they're discovering natural toxins can pose an even more serious threat. And some are saying these toxins are also a result, potentially, of global warming, because they come from algae blooms that are caused by warming temperatures in the waters.
Yes, that's really alarming if we're going to see more of these kind of deadly algae blooms. You're right, that is potentially very, very serious for elephant populations. When we think about the plight of the African elephant, we tend to think about ivory poaching, organized poaching, so that the ivory is then exported illegally, typically to East Asia. We think about elephants coming into conflict with poor people living in rural parts of Africa, because elephants need an awful lot of land and there's naturally a struggle over resources. And we don't really think about this fatal poison out there in the natural world. But of course, the big picture for African elephants is very precarious. Perhaps there were something like over 1 million African elephants in the late 1970s. I think most conservationists would now agree that there are probably just over 400,000. And of course, it's important to emphasize that Botswana is absolutely crucial to the survival of the African elephant. Perhaps a third of all African elephants are in Botswana, maybe about 130,000. And in broad terms, notwithstanding these sad events of the last few months, Botswana has been a tremendous elephant conservation success story.
Right. Barnaby, what is the bad case scenario here, though, that this algae bloom does return? They do the testing and they discover that it's infecting just too many of the water holes. It's a very distinct possibility. What could be their approach? Because then they have the ecological question, is if they try to attack and kill this bacteria, they don't know what else they might affect in killing that in the water source for these elephants. So what are they looking as far as treating this bacteria if it comes back en masse?
Well, probably the hopeful thing is that the Botswana authorities have a bit of time, that these elephant deaths stopped in June when the dry season set in Botswana, and the really heavy rains in Botswana don't resume until January or February, and that's when water holes like this would refill. So they have a few months to try and deal with the situation. I think that the other important point to emphasize is that although the pictures are very distressing, in broad terms, in terms of the status of the species, what happened this year was not, I hesitate to use the word insignificant, but compared to all the other threats elephants face, it does not in itself pose a major survival threat. But of course, it is something that has to be watched very carefully going forward.
Barnaby Phillips, great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your insights.